Welcome to the People's Parliament, where we will discuss the Integrity Commission's report concerning the Prime Minister's statutory declarations. I am Cleveland Tomlinson, Junior Spokesperson for Finance and Planning. We have assembled a panel who will help to dissect the findings of the report. Joining me are the Leader of Opposition and President of the People's National Party, Mark Goldin.
Greetings.
Deputy Leader of Opposition Business in the Senate and Opposition Spokesperson for Justice, Senator Donna Scott Motley. Member of Parliament and Opposition Spokesperson for Finance and Planning, Julian Robinson. And Leader of Opposition Business in the Senate and Opposition Spokesperson for National Security, Senator Peter Boynton. Thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
Great.
Good. Thanks.
Yes, so originally this discussion was intended to be live, but we're having a pre-recorded forum. We're here where we are. Opposition leader, why are we here? Why are we doing this? And why is this important?
We felt it's important to break it down, distill it, so that the public has a better idea of what's actually in it. We had originally planned to do this live on Tuesday afternoon. After we had sent out our notice that we would be doing this, a notice came out saying that Parliament would be convened for Tuesday. So we decided to pre-record it because we have to attend Parliament on Tuesday afternoon.
So we are here because we want the people to understand what is contained in the report, given the seriousness of what the findings indicate. And we have compiled questions that we have seen on social media and those that have been given to us through WhatsApp messages, etc. Now, on August 31, 2023, Prime Minister Andrew Holness was told in a face-to-face meeting that he was under investigation for possible illicit enrichment for over a year, and he said nothing whilst maintaining he was unaware of the reason for his declaration not being certified. Senator Motley, what do you make of this?
Well, let me say, first of all, Cleveland, that this is not a happy moment for the People's National Party, and it cannot be a happy moment for the country. Because it is clear, no matter how you look at it, that the Prime Minister has been unable to be certified for a number of years. And in responding to questions asked about it, he said that he did not know why, that he had provided all the information which was required. Now, as it turns out, we can debate the date. He says he was unaware before the 18th of August, but it was clear from the correspondence and the detail which was in the report that he was aware that he was being investigated. The word illicit enrichment, as you said, was used late, in my view, quite late in the investigation. So, Cleveland, a leader is expected to have a higher ethical standard because he or she will have to set the tone for what is right and wrong in the country. And I am of the view that Jamaica should be extremely concerned, no matter which political party you support, that our Prime Minister is under investigation.
I mean, it's very concerning that the decision was communicated in a letter from May 2023. It made reference to Section 14(5) of the Corruption Prevention Act, which is a section that creates the offense of illicit enrichment. A formal notice was, I think, dated August 18, which made specific reference to the elements of that offense, which is that you have assets which can't be supported by your declared income. And that warrants a request to explain yourself as to how you acquired those assets. He has known this from August last year. So for over a year, he has not come to the country and said, I am under investigation for illicit enrichment, even though the illicit 6 and the fact that there were these investigations of 6 parliamentarians, which became 8 later on, was well known as something that was being discussed constantly in the media and elsewhere. So it was, to my mind, a serious deception of the people to pretend or to hold back the fact that you as Prime Minister were one of the persons being investigated. So this is a big problem in terms of his credibility, his trustworthiness, And I don't think that we can have a leader of our country who has lost the trust and confidence of the people. This is why we're doing this, because we feel it's important that the people of Jamaica understand the seriousness of what is before us. And so the necessary decisions can be made to move the country forward.
I want to bring Member of Parliament Julian into the discussion. The IC in the report stated that the Director of Investigation was unable to arrive at a conclusion because he did not have access to Honus's personal expenses over the relevant period, along with unresolved questions around the companies that he is connected to.
Well, what he said specifically is that the Prime Minister refused to provide details of his personal expenses over the period of the investigation. And he could not conclude definitively on the issue of illicit enrichment because he needs to match income to expenditure. So here it is that you have a situation where the investigator is prevented from doing his work because the information he needs from the Prime Minister has not been made available to him. He goes on further to say that there are sources of funding for the 3 or 4 companies that the Prime Minister is involved with that he cannot ascertain where the funds have come from. And that is the main reason he has made a referral to the Financial Investigation Division, which investigates financial crimes.
One of the assets that you spoke of a while ago was an asset that Holness acquired in 2019. And the source of funding for that asset remains unexplained, Senator Bunting.
This is actually one of the more disturbing features, because what the investigation of the Integrity Commission has revealed is that funds were used from a charity. It's called Positive Foundation Positive Jamaica Foundation, a charity which, by definition, would have charitable purposes. And some funds in the region of approximately $32,000 US dollars were diverted to pay for a bond in the name of Mr. Honus.
Or his company, his personal company.
And I believe at some point it may have been either in his or his personal holding company, which he owns 100%. And it remained in that form for the life of the bond until it was called. And it was only after the bond had been redeemed and that transaction was now, in a sense, extinct.
Is it reasonable?
Closed. That, just allow me to finish, that upon questioning by the Director of Investigation that an attempt was made to repay that charitable foundation. So approximately 4 years had elapsed when the funds from the charitable foundation had been used to partially pay for a bond in the name of or for the benefit of Mr. Honus.
And the interest payments on the bond went into him or his personal company's account. And it's only when the Integrity Commission itself looked into this thing and said, hey, but some of the funding for this, 32,000 US of the 94,000 US cost of the bond, came from a charity with which Mr. Honus is very closely associated and is a director. That the necessary rearrangements of the thing were done and the money was returned to the charity. So for several years, he declared that bond as being his or his company's, and he received the payments under that bond for his or his company's account.
So it is not reasonable to assume that the Prime Minister would not have known that the entirety of the funds that were used to pay for the bond were attributed to him. It's not reasonable.
He had been getting statements regularly, which showed that the entirety of the amount was in a bond in his name or his company.
And the documentation he signed with the broker that he bought the bond through reflected that him or his company as being the purchaser of the bond. But he made the arrangements for the 32,000 to be paid by the charity into the purchase account to buy the bond.
And Leader, this is in the context of legislation which was introduced to prevent exactly that with charities.
If I was a donor to this charity, and was to learn that the charity's resources, which are intended to be for charitable purposes, helping poor people, helping people who are sick or needy, were being used to purchase a financial asset for the Prime Minister or his personal company, I would be very upset about it. And that I know as a fact that foundation receives funding not only from Jamaica but from outside as well. So it's a very serious matter.
Right. A part of the discussion that we have noted in the public domain is where the Director of Corruption Prosecution ruled that there is no evidence to support that the Prime Minister would have omitted willfully and intended to omit information from his statutory declarations. So there are two separate investigations that emanated from the Prime Minister's statutory declarations. I want you to discuss that first and tell us what were those two separate investigations. One relates to the omission of information for which the Director of Corruption Prosecution ruled, and then the second investigation was around illicit enrichment.
Well, I would say on the 4 accounts, there were 2 related to his parents put his name on, one with a former constituency manager and another one. Now, it's important to look at the detail. The Director of Investigation said he brought to Mr. Holness's attention on 3 occasions that his name was in fact on the accounts. And in spite of that, Mr. Holness did not declare those as part of his declaration. Secondly, and even more importantly, the Director of Investigation found that in 2 of those accounts, monies were flowing through the accounts from accounts solely controlled by Mr. Holness and to accounts solely controlled by Mr. Holness. So in essence, he's saying Mr. Holness said he knew nothing about these accounts, but funds are flowing in the region of millions of dollars. Deposits put in today, taken out the following week. 2 accounts controlled solely by him. So the question is, was Mr. Holness being truthful when he said, well, it's my parents' account and I don't know anything about it?
I'm seeing a comment here on social media that we just bad mind over this side and that we don't want the Prime Minister to get rich. Is that the case, Comrade Leader?
Well, it's nothing to do with whether the Prime Minister should be rich or not. That's not the issue. The issue is to do with compliance with the requirements of the law relating to integrity. And the statutory declarations that were made in this particular instance omitted certain bank accounts, which at the end of the year, at the date of the declaration, had fairly modest balances, but through which much larger sums had flowed from Mr. Holness's accounts and to Mr. Holness's accounts. And that was a basis upon which the Director of Investigations referred it to the corruption prosecutor to say, was this a deliberate falsehood on the declaration? Ultimately, she ruled that that could not be proved, and there was no prosecution to flow from that. But this was a relatively small matter in the scheme of this report. The bulk of this report is to do with the companies that Mr. Holness operates, has invested in, or is a director of, assets that they have, the very high volume of transactions between them, and the fact that they are filing tax returns which have suggested that they're dormant or they have no taxable transactions at all, and also investments that have been made using the charities money, and we've discussed that already. So there's a lot in this report which suggests that we need to get to the bottom of this matter. And the decision of the Integrity Commission is that it should be referred to the FID for further investigation, because as Julian said, they can't take it, the Integrity Commission can't take it any further because Mr. Holness refused to provide information that they required to complete the investigation. I mean, if you 3,600 transactions passing through 28 bank accounts, Mr. Holness was operating in his own name or the companies that he controlled, 28 bank accounts. And over a 3-year period, 3,600 transactions. This is the Prime Minister who was running the country at the time with some of the most important agencies and public bodies reporting to him. Yet he was conducting these very elaborate financial arrangements.
That's 1,200 transactions a year, which works out to be about, divided by, if you call it 360, that is what? 3-4 transactions a day.
Well, it's only banking days. The
On banking
transaction.
days,
So it's 250.
Right.
It's 4 transactions.
4 transactions a day going among the 28 accounts. I mean, most people have
Yeah.
2, 3, 4 accounts.
Yeah.
How you keep track of that is
What I wanted to respond to, because I think among the transactions, what is interesting is that 20 cardless cash deposits totaling 4,565,000 were made to Honus's Jane bank account between May and July of 2020. The depositor is unknown.
Yes.
And what was the explanation given? Reimbursement from Norman Brown, shareholder of Estate Bridge. Senator Boynton, is this a reasonable explanation?
But I can tell you, as someone who has spent a large part of my career in the financial sector, that type of transaction is what bankers or financial sector employees are trained to raise a red flag about. It matches what would be called structuring, where you break a larger transaction, in this case a total of 4.6 million, into small transactions which are, or smaller transactions which are below the reporting threshold. However, one of the things you're also trained to do is to look for what are called high-risk customers. And so, for example, all of us who are in parliament or in politics are referred to as politically exposed persons, or PEPs, and should attract closer scrutiny than the average customer. So this series of transactions would match what is called structuring, and you're trained in your anti-money laundering training, all frontline staff of the banks, the compliance people, etc., to look out for these transactions. Not necessarily illegal, but it's a red flag. And then an obligation would be on the bank to either report it to the FID as a suspicious set of transactions, or to get a plausible explanation from the account holder. In this case, two sources of these series of 20 cash transactions. One was that Mr. Honus's business partner in Estate Bridge and the chairman of UDC owed him,
HAJ.
and Housing Association of Jamaica owed him some money. But to me, to suggest that somebody at the level of a chairman of UDC, who I'm certain either has a checkbook or an online banking facility or a banking app, is going to get up from his desk somewhere close to 20 times over the period of 3 months and go to an ATM
To
lodge cash, it doesn't seem plausible to me. The other source was rent of a Mona property, I think it was referred to. No, unless you're operating some sort of back road operation, usually rent is collected once a month. So that would, I imagine, only account for a small number of the total transactions. So even if that were the case, there's still a lot to be explained, and it would, and I can speculate that this is probably one of the reasons why a referral has been made to the FID. It's I think that's a fair comment, because every person who is trained in anti-money laundering or sensitized to money laundering would quickly be able to pick up that this is one of those red flag transactions.
That transaction disturbed me for the reasons that Peter outlined, and because also, even with attorneys, there are certain obligations now which you have, because you're supposed to look at a transaction like that and actually report on it. Now, the other transaction which concerned me was the one where the account was opened at NCB.
Mm-hmm.
It was opened with no money in it. And I didn't know you could open an account with no money in it. A couple of days later, there was a deposit of a little over $143,000 US, which came from SSL. Mm-hmm. And in the context of the discussions which we have been having about SSL, I believe that the Prime Minister needs to address this and explain how and why that money came into his account from SSL. It was deeply concerning to me, and I'm sure that it must be deeply concerning to all the people who not only lost money, but know people who lost money. And the number one concern is what happened to borrowed money. Now, I'm not casting any aspersions on this situation. I'm just simply saying that the Prime Minister has to have a level of political sensitivity, and he has a duty to come to the country and explain some of these transactions to which we have been alerted by this report.
And Comrade Leader, at the press conference that was held last week, you raised the issue of tax compliance and why it is troubling. For our viewers who might not have read the report or understand the issues surrounding tax compliance, I want you to explain it for them and why it's a problem.
Well, the report indicates that the tax returns for Mr. Holness's private companies, in one called Imperium that he owns 100% of, and the others that are referred to in the report, for the 2021 year of assessment, financial year, they filed nil returns, meaning that they had they declared no taxable income and no taxable expenses, tax deductible expenses. Now, that the report says is inconsistent with the information provided to the Integrity Commission by Mr. Holness, which shows that these companies were in fact very active. They had receipts, they had expenditures. As I've said, over 400 million of transactions over the period was passing between these companies, to and fro. So, and the report makes specific reference to items of income that were earned during the period. So the report makes reference to a provision in the Income Tax Act, which makes it a criminal offense not to accurately report one's taxable income when you're filing returns. So this is another very serious matter. The Prime Minister is the head of the government, and he should not be filing tax returns which are not consistent with the reality of the transactions of those companies. So this is a big issue as well.
Some of the concerns that we have seen in the public domain is that these two institutions to which the report from the Integrity Commission is referred to, Tax Administration Jamaica and the Financial Investigation Division, they both fall under the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. The Minister reports to the Prime Minister. There's a sense of public concern that there might be interference or obstruction of the investigation. Senator Bunting, is that a legitimate position for members of the public to take?
Absolutely. The Prime Minister uses his own standard. When his ministers got into trouble, Wheatley, Royal Reid,
Floyd Green.
Floyd. Well, no.
Floyd was a little different.
That was a little different. He got into trouble.
He was put in
St. Elizabeth.
He was put in an article.
J.C. Hutchinson.
He told them they had to step aside. They had to leave the cabinet because it would not have been appropriate for them to remain and perhaps and have the risk or the perception that they could obstruct the investigation. Now, there's no minister in a stronger position to obstruct an investigation than the Prime Minister himself.